Now we move to chapter 22, verse 1. The Living Bible, if you must choose, take a good name rather than great riches. For to be held in loving esteem is better than silver and gold. It's far better to have a good testimony in your locality than to be known as a rich man in your locality. It's far better to have a testimony in your locality that you are righteous, upright, humble, good, loving, kind, pure, rather than to have a testimony in your locality that you are wealthy and you have this, that, and the other. That's basically what that verse means. Verse 2. The rich and the poor have a common bond. The Lord is the maker of them all, which teaches us that basically all human beings are equal in God's eyes. And if in my thinking I despise any human being, either because of his community or his background or his education or his intelligence or his culture or his barbarianism or anything like that, that shows that I have not understood the first thing about God, that God is the one who has made all people. If I haven't understood that first thing, there's not much hope that I'll understand anything else about God. It's one of the first things I need to understand is that God has made all people and He's made them all equal. There are these differences of wealth and intelligence and color and culture, but in God's eyes they're all the same. And we need to look at every single human being. That particularly when we look at the poor people. Those who are far beneath us in social level. I'm not talking about our neighbors. They are usually around the same social level. I'm talking about the people who are very much lower than us. Very much lower levels of society. To see them as equal to us in God's eyes. Now that's something we must always keep in mind. That person may be poor, I may be rich. But in God's eyes we're just the same. And one day when we stand before the judgment seat, there will be none of us will be on a higher level than the other person. All are going to stand on the same level ground. It's good to keep that in mind always. Verse 3, the prudent sees the evil and hides himself, but the simple go on and are punished. And that teaches us that wisdom is to think ahead and to consider, if I go this way, there can be some snare of the devil there. He sees the evil ahead and he avoids it. Whereas the simple person, he just goes on simply and he falls into the pit which the devil has made. Jesus said, be shrewd as serpents, to think ahead and to see what will happen if I continue along this way. What will happen if we do this? That is wisdom. Forethought is wisdom. The wise man sees the evil and avoids it. That can have many applications in many areas of practical life and also our spiritual life. To ask God to help us to see what will happen if we go like this? What will happen if I bring up my children like this? What will happen if I run my home like this? What will happen if I continue along this way in my office and doing this? Or in this type of conversation? What will happen if I continue this friendship with this particular person? Where is it going to finally lead to? And then the wise person is who thinks all about that and takes precautions now itself. But the simple person is one who says, yeah, the Lord will take care of it. He's got spiritual language for all this and goes ahead and falls. Verse 4. The reward of humility and the fear of the Lord are riches, honor, and life. We can say that those are the two things which are the most important qualities for the soil in which the fruit of the Spirit is to grow. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. And in the fruit of the Spirit, we don't see humility and we don't see the fear of God. Why is that? Because humility and the fear of God are the soil on which the fruit grows. Love is the greatest fruit, but it grows in the soil of humility and the fear of God. We can say they are the two most important qualities for the soil in which the fruit of the Spirit is to grow. By humility and the fear of the Lord are all spiritual riches, all spiritual honor, and all spiritual life. We are to cultivate these qualities. This is to dig up the fallow ground, is to humble ourselves, to fear God, to humble ourselves and fear God, so that the fruit of the Spirit can grow forth in our life. Verse 5, it speaks about something else that can grow up if we don't have this type of soil. Thorns and snares are in the way of the perverse. You know, Jesus said in the parable of the sower about the man in whose ground the seed brought forth fruit, but then thorns grew up. Thorns can't grow up in a soil that is got humility and the fear of God. No, it's because of a lack of humility and a lack of the fear of God that these thorns grow up. The lusts for so many things, the deceitfulness of riches, the cares of this world, and crush and crowd out the fruit that God is seeking to grow in our lives. Thorns and snares are in the way of the perverse, but he who guards himself will be far from them. That means the person has to guard himself in order to stay far away from these thorns. He has to pull out the weeds. Verse 6, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. It doesn't tell us here how many years a person is a child, because it doesn't say train up a young man, it says train up a child. And I would think it's probably referring to the first 12 years of a person's life. The first 12 years, the person's a child. After that, he's growing up to be a young man or a young woman. But those 12 years, God gives to us as parents to train up, to discipline, to teach, to correct, to rebuke, to punish, to encourage, to strengthen, to challenge, and to train that child in the way that he should go. And when he is old, what we have labored in all those years, just like the evil that the wicked does boomerangs on him, this that we have sowed will one day, even if the child drifts away for a while, finally, it will come back and bring that person to the Lord. And so that's very important, those early years of a person's life. And a father and mother who have no time for their children in those first 12 years to teach them the way of the Lord, will leave it to the Sunday school to do that, or the church will do that. Yeah, they will have to reap the consequences in later years. And that's a sad thing we see today so often. How when you have situations where parents are too busy, sometimes father and mother are all out to work and the child is alone at home and they're busy making money. But money is not what that child needs in the first 12 years. It can do with a little less. It can do with a mother who has time to instruct that boy or the girl in those early years. Yeah, that's something we need to think of. Those of us who have growing children, that we never think that time spent with our children in those first 12 years is a wasted time at all. It's the most important investment we can ever make in all of our life as parents. Verse 7, the rich rules over the poor, and the borrower becomes the lender's slave. Now that's basically what is the result of getting into debt. When we get into debt, it says we become a slave. And it's not God's will that any of us should become slaves. And that's why the Word of God says in Romans 13:8, owe no man anything. And if we are not wholehearted to take seriously that exhortation that we should never be in debt, owe no man anything, then we shall remain slaves. Because it says here, the borrower is a slave to the lender. Then I'm a slave. And I have to cry out to God and say, Lord, all my spirituality and all my knowledge is just a lot of garbage as long as I'm a slave. Help me to be free from this slavery and never to be in this slavery at any time of my life. Let no one deceive himself here. Keep out of debt. There's a sad story we read in 2 Kings chapter 4. You know the story of that widow who came to Elisha Elisha told her to go and get borrow vessels from all her neighbors and to pour the little oil that she had. But why? What was her problem? I mean, leaving aside the miracle, what was her problem? Her problem was that her husband had died and left her in debt. And he was a preacher. Think of that. He was a man who spoke the word of God and he left his wife in debt. It was a shameful thing to do. No, we should never do such a thing. That's why it's very important that we never get into debt at all. Verse 8. In the Living Bible, it says, the unjust tyrant will reap disaster, and his reign of terror shall end. We can see that happening in many countries around us in the world, in Asia and Africa, where some unjust tyrant dominates the people, and then finally he is assassinated, and his reign of terror ends. Now, we are not in that danger because none of us are going to rule any countries, but we can apply this to ourselves in areas where we tend to be tyrants towards somebody else. It says here that the rod of his fury will perish. And that means we can look at it like this, that a time can come, if I haven't overcome my anger in my younger days, a time can come when I'm older, physically weaker, mentally weaker, emotionally weaker, and this anger just overpowers me. And it frustrates me because my body is not strong enough like it was in my younger days. I could explode in anger, get people to do what I wanted, like a father who's a tyrant over his children. And he hasn't overcome his anger. He can be old and his body becomes weak, but he hasn't overcome his anger yet. There can be a frustration there that makes him irritable, that hinders his own spiritual life. It's good to overcome anger quickly. And it's good not to be a tyrant over anyone, not over our children, not over servants, over no one. To learn to overcome our anger. Verse 9, he who is generous will be blessed, for he gives some of his food to the poor. That's a truth we have already considered on a number of occasions. Just notice that the book of Proverbs repeats some truths again and again and again and again for emphasis. It's more blessed to give than to receive. There's a blessing in being generous. Verse 10, drive out the scoffer, the proud man, and contention will go out. Even strife and dishonor will cease. Get rid of that conceited person, and then there'll be no more arguments or quarreling or strife. There must be no place for a proud person in the church of the living God. All strife comes through proud people. And the preaching of the word must be of such a nature always in the church that there is no place for proud, conceited people to have any place there. And that's how we keep the church free from strife. Verse 11, two things, purity of heart and graciousness of speech makes the Lord, the King, our friend. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks, Jesus said. And when there is purity in the heart and graciousness in our speech, the Lord the King will be